Good morning everybody, welcome to the first real meeting of the People and Culture Committee for quite a long time. We'll go first of all to apologies for absence, and I'll speak to our clerk Amanda.
We've got apologies from Councillor Hopkinson, and I think Councillor Bromley may be running late.
Okay, fine. Now, for members of the public who are viewing this, I'm John Davis, I'm the Chair of the Fire Authority. To my immediate right is...
Thank you, Chair. I'm Simon Shilton, I'm one of the Assistant Chief Fire Officers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Mick Cromwell, I'm the Chief Fire Officer and Chief Exec of Avon Pharmacy Service.
Good morning, I'm Emma Bowen, Democratic Services Assistant.
Hello, I'm Councillor Ruth Jacobs, North Somerset Council.
I'm Amanda Brown, Clerk to Avon Fire Authority.
Steve Crowley, Democratic Services, Bristol Council.
Brenda Massey, Councillor for South Mead Bristol and Vice Chair of the Authority.
Richard Tucker, North Somerset Council, Western Superintendent.
Thank you everybody. And now we'll go on to emergency evacuation procedures. I'll look to my colleagues to the right for advisors.
Thank you, Chair. There are two exits to the room should we need to vacate the building. One is immediately in front of me and one is behind if you follow the green arrows. And the assembly point, should we need one, is out in the front car park. We are not expecting a test fire alarm this morning, so if we do have the fire alarm activate, then please just follow ourselves through the nearest exit.
Okay, thank you. And now we ask for declarations of interest from colleagues. Are there any pecuniary interests you need to declare? Thank you very much.
Nancy?
Okay, so now we move on to Chair's business, and some very sad news to begin with. I'm going to pass across to Simon Shilton to cover this for me. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Members, some very sad news. Over the weekend, we were informed of the passing of Watch Manager Steve Angel from Bath Fire Station on call. Steve has been an employee of the organisation for over 30 years as an on-call firefighter and a very popular and well-known and well-respected watch manager within the service. Steve was a very keen motocross enthusiast, and unfortunately at an event over the weekend on Saturday, Steve was involved in a fatal accident. So very sad news for us, and I'd like to propose that we hold, we take our stand and hold a minute's silence in memory of Steve Angel. Thank you, members. Thank you.
Okay. So, on that very sad note, we'll open the meeting properly. Just to let you know that I'm chairing this meeting because the previous chair, Cleo Lake, is no longer a member of the authority, and a new chair of this committee will be appointed after our annual general meeting at the end of the month. Just to confirm that the People and Culture meeting is taking place face-to-face for the first time since the lockdown. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 restrictions, we have had to limit the number of attendees and the entry of press and public. Presenters will stay in the anterooms are required and will exit the room through the other door into the corridor. For this reason, we're recording this meeting for the public to view, whereas before COVID committee meetings were not recorded. And my other piece of business is to remind members that the HMIC FRS inspection has been completed and strategic feedback session will take place in July, with a final report expected at the end of the year. Okay. So item 5 is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the People and Culture Committee held on the 4th of March. Are we happy to accept those as a true and correct record? We assign them. I see a proposer. Mr. Tucker. I see Brendan Massey seconding. Any votes against? Any abstentions? All those in favour? Lovely, thank you. Public access, is there public access?
No.
No public access. Okay, we move on to the first item, number 7, which is the annual review of employment cases. And I go to our Chief Fire Officer, Chief Exec, to take that. Oh,
Yes, Karen Shear.
Karen,
Oh,
Shear,
okay, so.
head of HR, just take to the room now.
Oh, yes.
Good morning, everyone. I thought they'd know who I was and got them in. So I wanted to take
Karen, you can take your mask off now, sat down. Makes it easier for you to speak.
Thank you. I wanted to take you through the paper that I've submitted to you on the review of the employment cases over the last year. This was something that elected members have asked for previously, so it's probably about the 4th time I presented this paper to you. Kept it fairly succinct, and obviously it's also quite difficult that when we've got a small number of cases, we can't provide too much detail in the public report because that potentially could identify the individual or the circumstances. So I think in all it's good news. So the number of cases generally speaking have gone down year on year. That said, in terms of grievances, we have had a couple of grievances that you would know, which was around our work that we did with South West Ambulance Service. And I think that was more around the fact that we were having to put those measures in place very quickly after the pandemic. A lot of things were working very fast paced, and it was absolutely right on top of that. As a service, we supported our ambulance colleagues who were facing a very difficult time and needed additional resources. What that meant then was that sometimes it was quite difficult for us to put all of the policies into place to support that. So some of that one was around somebody who wanted to do volunteering for the ambulance service, but there were some concerns about whether they were mentally resilient enough to be able to do that. So it was actually a very benevolent approach that the manager took, but that employee I think really wanted to protect their community and wanted to be involved and raise a grievance, which was then resolved informally through discussion, which is what you would always hope in these cases. The other one was around payment. So again, because we put people onto those contracts very, very quickly, it was more around what payment they would get when they came back to the service and were doing their retraining, and whether we should have continued to pay them as if they were working with the SWAST, or whether actually because they were back with us, they would revert to their normal employment. So they were quite unusual cases, and what I would hope is that that wouldn't happen now, is because we're actually now looking at all of our policies and practices, because we're continuing to support SWAST at the moment. That work is working very effectively. So it's just really, I think, probably those two cases, if we remove those, our cases in terms of grievances are fairly static. So before I move on to the disciplinary cases, I just wondered if you've got any questions around grievances.
No, I can't see any, Karen, thank you.
No? Okay. So in terms of disciplinary cases, our overall trend, so if I just think back over the previous years, back in April 2017 through to March 2018, we had 18 discipline cases. It reduced in the 38 to 12 cases, to 6 cases last year, and then it has gone back up to 11 cases. So that is quite a significant increase year on year, but it still only represents 1.3% of the workforce. So if you compare that with similar fire services or other organisations, our number of disciplinary cases is still very, very low. If you look at trends, it's always quite difficult to have trends when you've got a very small number of cases. But what you'll notice is that a lot of those are around performance and attendance capability. In many organisations, they would have a separate capability procedure and policy, and those employees would be dealt with under that process. At the moment, Avon Fire and Rescue Service don't have that capability policy in place. That's mainly legacy stuff, in terms of the trade unions nationally don't support having a capability policy, but that is something that we're reviewing at the moment. We're going to be having a discussion as part of our work on the transformation programme. So you may be aware that we've got a big project in the service of 3-year project, which is looking at all of our policies, all of our processes, and also some of the technology that we use in terms of how we do things better and differently. So it may be that in the future that those would be dealt with under capability, and you wouldn't see them within that report. I think what is really important, and also for you to know and hope you be reassured about, is that for performance cases, a formal sanction is always the last resort. We're very much working with that employee, with their manager, to make sure that they've got appropriate support and development in place, right from their training school all the way through their career. So if there are any performance issues, that support happens first and with the informal process before we ever move to a more formal process. The same for attendance capability, which is sickness, absence. In every single case, they would go to occupational health, and we would get quite a lot of information back from occupational health. We would also be looking at whether ill health retirement is appropriate. We would be looking at whether we can put any reasonable adjustments in place, whether we can redeploy them into a different role if that's appropriate. So again, a dismissal and attendance would be the absolute last resort. So what I would want to reassure you on that case when they were dismissed with attendance, we explored and exhausted all opportunities. And actually what I can share with you is the employee in that situation actually said they were quite surprised it had taken the service so long to reach a dismissal process, because they felt that, or they know that in other organisations, they probably would have been dismissed much earlier, but they knew that we'd taken a huge amount of time to see whether there was anything else that we could do to avoid that dismissal. On a couple of other cases, I think there's some issue around the things that they do outside of work, our employees do outside work, and not realise that that can have an impact on them within their employment. I think that's the same in many other organisations. So things like social media, maybe putting things on Twitter, on Facebook, or those kinds of forums which wouldn't be appropriate, and then come to our light. And it's absolutely right and proper that we take appropriate action. Sometimes, whilst our policies are very clear that something that you do outside of work could affect your employment if there is a direct link. Sometimes I think some employees don't always understand that. And ACFO Shilton will be talking to you later on in this meeting about the NFCC Code of Ethics. And that's a really good document. It makes it very, very clear that all of our values, our behaviour framework, all of the good things that the service has put in place, that does not just apply for me Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, and for our operational staff on duty. People often in the community, they know that you work for Avon Fire and Rescue Service, and rightly so, we should be exemplary within the community. And so sometimes we do get complaints that people bring to our attention things that happened outside of work. So there is a piece of work that we're going to be doing. I met with our head of communications this morning, just to try and look at even more education that we can do, just to make sure that employees are fully aware of things like social media and the dangers of posting, some of those things. You might also note that sometimes people have resigned prior to a dismissal or a disciplinary process. Again, there's a matter of debate as to whether employers should continue with the disciplinary process or whether it's right to accept a resignation. I think for you as a fire authority, it's lower risk. If we accept when you're normally writing is on the wall, that employee understands that based on all the evidence that we've gathered, following a due process in terms of the investigation, they are highly likely to be dismissed or to have a severe disciplinary sanction. And in many cases, it's quite often that an employee will say, would you accept my resignation? So in all cases, we take some soundings from various people. We may take a manager's guidance if there's some legal impact, but actually it probably negates the fact of going through a whole disciplinary process, potentially an appeal, and then potentially an employment tribunal. So that's something that we do normally accept a resignation in those cases. So whistle through all of those cases. I didn't know if there's any questions on disciplines before I move on to the final part of the report, which is on employment tribunal cases.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Karen. It's just the two that I noticed for IT policy breach. I'm kind of difficult to go into real detail, but if you could sort of outline without sort of impinging on the individuals involved.
Yeah. That's around e-learning, if I remember right. So we used e-learning quite frequently within the service is a very good and effective way of getting some of our training materials out on stations. So rather than having a formal traditional training course, they were doing e-learning package. And my understanding is those two employees, I wasn't directly involved in the case, so I can only give you sort of outline, is that they used each other's access codes to do each other's e-learning. There's also a quiz you do at the end of the e-learning to see whether you're competent in that area. That's a very important part for us. It's very important that it's me that's done that e-learning and that I've learned from that, rather than getting a colleague to do my e-learning for me and falsify the record by signing them off. So that was what that one was about. The case is pending at the moment, so we haven't made a decision yet as to whether that will proceed to formal disciplinary action or whether that's more about conversations and informal actions to be taken by the local line managers to obviously make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have, if I may, we have had cases in terms of social media where staff members have been misguided in some of the comments of things that they've shared on social media. And obviously we would need to take action in that regard.
Just to reassure you as well, we look at other services as well to make sure that our sanctions are in line with what other services are doing. So I sat yesterday on a regional HR group, and whilst every case is fundamentally different and you do really need to delve down into the detail of the case, but it is also very important that we look at what other fire and rescue services are doing, and also from employment tribunals, case studies, employment law, just to make sure that our approach is commensurate both with best practice and what you would expect within other organisations.
Okay, thank you.
So we want to the final part, which is employment tribunals. What I should have mentioned as well in terms of culture, is that we're also the bullying and harassment part of the policy, I think, of the paper, and this is really important. We haven't had any formal cases around bullying and harassment in this last year. That is quite fundamentally different to previous years, where we had a number of particularly female operational staff who raised bullying and harassment complaints, that they felt they were treated less favourably than their male counterparts. We haven't had any of those cases, so whilst we've noted it is really, really positive for us, what we mustn't do is be complacent, because also it could be that people don't feel comfortable in raising those issues, or they don't feel that any action is going to be taken, or they feel they've just got to go along with things on station and not feel that they're able to raise that. So we've got the culture survey going on, which again you've got a paper on that later on today, and also we've got the HMIC FRS inspection, which has been going on over the last few weeks, and as part of that inspection they've done a staff survey which has asked very specific questions about bullying, harassment or discrimination. So what we will do is triangulate all of that information to make sure that that information is indicative of what's going on within the service, or whether there are issues that we need to take note of. So sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier, but I think that's an important part to note. In terms of employment tribunal claims, we've had what we call a pre-conciliation claim. So before somebody goes to employment tribunal, AFAs have a process where somebody can raise what we call a pre-conciliation claim, which is really why you're trying to work with that employee, or in this case an ex-employee, to see if you can reach some informal resolution to their concerns before it proceeds to a full employment tribunal. So that's what's happened with that employee, and we're very much working with them at the moment to try and understand why they left the service and what their issues are, and whether we can learn some lessons from that, or whether actually that employee did contribute themselves to some of the issues that they found themselves in. So that's been supported by Human Resources and the Head of Ops Response, so they're having various communications with that employee. What we very much hope is that that will stop the need for it to progress to employment tribunal, but we don't know at this point in time. That's still in the early stages of those informal conversations. And then the last case in terms of employment tribunals, I mentioned this before, this one's been mumbling on for about 18 months to 2 years, and this was around our apprentice selection process that we had about 2 years ago now, and claimants raised a potential discrimination claim, and they felt that they were treated less favourably because they were a male applicant as opposed to a female applicant. They actually failed one of the fundamental aspects of the selection process, which was the ladder climb. They were very, very underconfident in climbing and descending the ladder. So much so that the trainers and experienced trainers that were there at the time really had some concern that couldn't be trained. Obviously, that's a very essential part of being a firefighter, is the ability to climb a ladder and not be afraid of heights. So they failed on that aspect, but what they've tried to bring is a discrimination claim to say that that failure wasn't there and that it was done because they were a male and not a female applicant. We're fighting that case quite vigorously. We've got a lot of evidence to absolutely show that isn't the case. We had a female comparator who also failed the ladder climb. So we very much believe that that isn't a valid claim, and our legal advisors are supporting us with that. But it's at the appeal stage at the moment, so the appeal submission, our response to that went in about a week or so ago. So we're just waiting to see whether the tribunal will strike that case out or whether it will proceed to an employment tribunal, in which case it will be listed for later on this year, and I can update you if that case progresses.
Okay.
That's it from me. If you've got any questions?
Any questions? Well, first of all, I welcome, because this is being recorded. So, Councillor Shelley Bromley from Bath and North East Somerset has now joined us, so welcome. Any other questions for Karen? Well, a very comprehensive report, Karen. Thank you for that. Note the positive nature of this report compared to previous ones. So I think that's a massive thank you to everybody in the service, not least yourself and your team. So thank you for that. We're asked to note this. Are we happy to note it? Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you face to face and not virtually anymore. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Enjoy the rest of the meeting. Bye.
Okay, so item number 8 on the agenda is the cultural survey update, which Simon Schultz is going to present.
Thank you. Is Richard here?
Yes, he is.
Yes, certainly, yes. So I'll give an overview and then if there are any questions, okay. Members, in front of you today is a report for noting. It's a progress report with regards to our internal cultural survey. It's our second cultural survey. So as a reminder for members, we undertook a cultural survey for the first time for some considerable years in 2018, and a written response to the Dr. Baker report on the organisational authority in 2017. That cultural survey was undertaken independently by an external organisation and was done by collecting quantitative and qualitative data. The results of that survey came out with 4 key themes, and the organisation produced a document called Making Avon Fire and Rescue Service a Better Place to Work for Everybody. And since that time, we've been focusing on a cultural change journey, making improvements across the service in direct response to the feedback from our staff at that time. And that was from around 75% of our organisation responded to that survey. Also, we committed to a follow-up survey within a 2 to 3 year time frame. COVID has delayed things slightly in progressing the cultural survey, but we've launched a second cultural survey in May, on May the 11th, with a set of questions which are directly relating to the 4 key themes from the first survey, really for us to gauge our journey to date and the necessary improvements that we've been making, whether they've been having an impact across the service, and of course also to explore other areas that we may need to focus on with regards to our ongoing journey of cultural change. This year, this survey itself, we went out to tender, and a company called Opinion Research Services facilitated the survey on our behalf. Again, they are an independent company who contact our employees directly, so there's an independence there to reassure staff across the organisation of that level of independence. Now, at the time of writing the report, to date at that time, we'd had 20% of our staff had responded. We are constantly going out to our staff to remind them to engage and encourage them to engage with the cultural survey. That figure is now raised to 28% of this morning responses. So as we continue in reminding staff and direct them to where they can provide and respond to the survey, we're seeing an increase in engagement from staff themselves. So I'll pause there, members, for any questions. I've got Richard, who is our Culture and Inclusion Manager, who will also be able to help with any questions that you may have around the current survey at this moment in time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so colleagues, are there any questions? Richard?
Good to see you, Rich. Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, just the 20%, 28% now. In terms of most surveys, that's not a bad response rate. Obviously, there are different types. So, are you confident you can get that up a bit higher over time? What's the kind of long-term sort of view in terms of how you can try and get more people to obviously engage, and what do you think you can get it up to at the end of the day?
Well, we are putting out, every 2 weeks we're putting out messages and encouragement to all staff to take part in the survey. That's us here, but also opinion research services are also doing the same. So there's 2 lots of communications going out, encouraging people to do the survey, and obviously, telling them about the benefits of having their voice heard. Yeah, I mean, 28%, it's not bad, but I would like to see it rise a little bit more. We haven't got long left. It's 30th of June, which is the closing date. So we're making every effort. So we've written to watch managers, station managers. We've put up on our workplace sort of forums as well. Has gone out to all people via email. So we are doing everything we can. I mean, there was a clash also with the HMIC FRS survey happening at the same time. So there possibly is some survey fatigue there. But also I know that everyone's generally really quite busy at the moment, so that could be an indication as well of the low response rate. But we will do everything we can in the next week and a half to ensure we get that figure raised up.
Thank you. It's not bad overall. So
we've also begun putting slots in people's diaries automatically to remind them, allocating them some time within their diaries to facilitate the staff survey. As a comparator, if you compare 28%, the response rate for the HMIC staff survey was in the low 20s. So we're just above that. And as Richard said, timing-wise, there may be either some confusion around the difference between the 2 surveys or a little bit of survey fatigue in there as well.
What we have committed to is that it will be completely independent, which is great. We've commissioned the company to do it, so it will be independent, completely anonymous, non-attributable, and what's more, we'll publish the results on the same day that we see it as a leadership team. So for me, we publish it for us as a service. So from that perspective, I would hope that all staff have confidence in it, and what's more, that this is an indicator of our journey, isn't it? So we know that we had a difficult time in the past, but I'm very hopeful that this will say that our journey is positive, but we've still got a bit of a way to go in certain areas.
Thank you. Yeah, we only get 1 in 3 turn up in council elections, so we can't say much, can we? Thank you.
Brenda.
Are you using the same questions as last time, or have you changed them significantly?
We have made changes to the original questions, mainly because we're in a different place now. We're 2 years on from where we were before. We know that the amount of work that we've done, the amount of achievements we've made so far on the journey, we felt it wasn't appropriate to ask the same questions. And there was also danger that people would get stuck in the past and really sort of respond in terms of legacy. So I pulled a small working group together, and we worked quite extensively along with ORS to develop a fairly new questionnaire. There is some reflection to old questions, but generally it's quite new. So.
what we've focused on, Councillor, is the 4 key things from the first survey. So we've produced a set of questions which focus on the 4 key things. They were the areas that we were making improvements in, where the document Making Avon Fire Registers a Better Place to Work for All was focusing in with regards to the activities that the organisation has been working towards, really. And cultural journey is an ongoing, there's never end state, if you like. It's an ongoing journey of continually listening, continually improving and adapting accordingly.
We very much come at this from every person in our organisation has a voice and has the ability to use that voice in the right way, of course, but, and that's great. That's the way it should be, and everyone contributes. That's the ethos that we use. And, I think that we're learning that as we go, so I think that we've come a long way. I think, from my perspective, and certainly the feel I get around the organisation, we have come a long way in the last few years. And I'm hopeful that this output and this outcome will tell us that we've done that. We have moved. However, there are still things that we need to do. So, that culture is about a journey, and rather than a specific destination, as Simon's just said. And it should never end. It's one of those things where you should constantly be tweaking and moving the tiller according to what's needed. So.
Okay. So the only question I've got then, as Chair, yes, I understand colleagues have confirmed that in terms of percentage, you will never get 100%, and we are pushing up and up and up, and we talk about the HMI CFRS. I guess the statistic I'd like to understand is how much of that 28%, or let's say hopefully 40%, reflect the profile of our staff, so we aren't getting a skewed result of, again, 100% response from a particular demographic within our organisation, and very, very much underrepresented in stats. So I guess my final statistical outputs I'd like to be this is our staff profile, all staff. This is the response profile. Is it in any way skewed? I think that would mean, and I'm not saying that's going to give a positive or negative response. It could be neutral, it could be positive or negative. But I think from a point of view of credibility, it does need to reflect staff profile just as much as the numbers. So if we could have that within the report, I would find that, I think we'd all find that useful to understand that it's reflective of, AFRS.
Sure. Post the closing date, 30th of June, I would estimate about 2 to 3 weeks for ORS to do the analysis and also create the report. And then they will come to us and deliver that report. But in between that, I will have a conversation with them to ask them to actually reflect that as well.
Please. I think that needs to be noted in the outcome, whether it's positive, negative or neutral. Hopefully it's more positive than the last one, which should be a step forward on our journey. So thank you. Okay, so that's for noting. Are we happy to note? Thank you. Now we move on to the place prepared. Injury settlements 2020-21. Should give Emma 5 million. That desk has been worn away by the end of the year. We're going to rotate the desk to even up the wear on the veneer. We'll have a big hole in the middle of it, won't it? Right, Simon.
Yes, I've got Health and Safety Manager to also support any questions you have about specific cases. So we'll just invite Stacey in.
Welcome, Stacey.
All right. So members, the paper in front of you again is for recommendations for noting the findings. The paper presents to you the injury claims and injury settlements. Are the injury claims ongoing or the injury settlements that have occurred in the financial year April 2020 to March 2021? Now, in regards to any claims injury claims that are made to the organisation, they are generally insurable claims, so generally handled via our insurance company. When we do get any claims come forward, what we do is we look back at the history of that event. When we do have a workplace incident, they are normally investigated. So our first point of call would be, first and foremost, the recording of that event. So we have a recording system that exists within the organisation, and then we would visit the investigating officer's findings and any outcome of those findings in order to provide all the necessary information for our insurers, and then address or assess any element of liability from the authority and the services perspective, and also any necessary improvements or workplace improvements that we might need to undertake. Including all of that is also the review of the risk assessment for that particular event, activity or workplace. So in front of you on page 21 of your reports, you have a list there of claims that have been settled within the last 12 months. You will note there on the column of relevant statute, that gives you the regulations in which the claim has been made under. But also around the RIDDOR injury regulations. The RIDDOR is reporting for injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences regulations in the workplace. They're normally reportable if they result in an absence from work of more than 7 days, or of course a serious injury, or the worst case scenario would be death in the workplace as well. On page 22 of your report, lists ongoing injury claims that are still to be settled and to be investigated, or working with our insurance company to look into the details around each of those claims themselves. So with that, members, I will pause. I have Stacey here, who's our health, safety, well-being, welfare and fitness manager. Quite a bit of a mouthful there to respond to any questions that you might have.
That's very good you say that, because obviously I would fail the bottom line of my Specsavers test. I think Stacey needs a larger name board.
Chair, can I just make one amendment to the minutes, please? On the papers, on page 23, under the legal and policy implications, the final line says under RIDDOR Act 2013. It's actually RIDDOR is regulations, it's not an act.
Okay.
That's just one small amendment, please. Thank you.
Okay, right, so thank you. Sherry, I saw your hand up.
Thank you. Chair. Yes, I just had a question. Are these fairly typical? This is a fairly typical representation of some accidents and incidents that would normally happen.
What, in Avon in general? Or
Yes, just, yes.
Yeah, I think it's mixed. You can see some areas of specific regulations where, you might have a focus and enhance what we have in place in terms of our management systems. But yeah, generally I would say it's representatives. Quite a mix, I think.
Yeah, and I noticed that, yeah, thank you.
I think paragraph 3.2 of the paper might help as well. It says the number of settled claims or ongoing claims is relatively small in number and represents claims for approximately 1% of staff. So that gives you a yardstick in terms of the national.
Brenda?
Yeah, 2 claims about irritation to skin. There seems to be an awful long time between the incident and the claim being put in.
Yeah.
Which it almost looks like somebody said to them, how about claiming for it or something?
It can be quite difficult, I think, particularly with diseases, because it can take longer to get a diagnosis than what you would have with an injury. So sometimes people will go away and they'll meet with like dermatologists and specialists, and then they will decide if they've got a good weighting behind putting a claim, and they get up to 3 years before from the date of exposure or from the date of diagnosis normally as well. So it can be from exposure or 3 years from the date of diagnosis. So sometimes you can get illness and disease claims coming a lot longer compared to injuries. That's probably why there is also a lag, a time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Could I ask you, this £25,000 that seems to be quite, is that a normal amount, or is it just?
It's like the set amount that our employers or legal representatives would put to a claim of that nature and that severity. So it does depend on how somebody puts a claim, and that's my understanding anyway, if it's a minor or major litigation claim.
in litigation, Ruth, there are normally bands of different amounts of claims depending on the type of injury.
It seems a lot of
depends.
Yes.
And it may be a lot less than that. If you look at the ones
Yes,
that
there
have
are
been
some that say we can
settled, if you look at the ones that were settled, but a lot less than that, but they would have been set at that level.
Yes, understand.
Okay, so thank you, Stacey. I guess I am a little bit concerned, you know, in terms of the time between the incident and the claim date. You know, I do appreciate the point you're making, especially now in the current climate, it's difficult to get medical opinions. But I think we used to understand moving forward, and I simply expect to know now, on one or two of them, why there is such a long time between. I guess from the point of view of us scrutinising the work of the service, and again, I don't expect to have the answers to this now, but what would be useful to perhaps bring this back at another meeting is what learning have we taken away from these incident claims, and how many of these have resulted in a change in our process of work? So I think that as a service we would want to know how we've responded to accidents and incidents and how we've made our workplaces safer. So perhaps, you know, I certainly don't expect you to go through it line by line now, but it might be interesting to have a report to the meeting.
Yeah, I think what we've done in the last 12 months is we've taken a really hard look at our health safety management system, our compliance system, and had a look and reflected on not just the claims, but the incidents that we've had, and where we think we might have weaker points, where we need to enhance that and improve really our claims defensibility. Just so that, I mean, anybody can come in and put in a claim, so we just need to feel in a better position where we've got the right paperwork, audit trails, that sort of thing. So in the last 12 months, there's been lots of discussions at SLT and even at SLB even recently. We've talked a little bit about this, how are we going to move forward and enhance, how we're going to look at the structure of my team so that we've got the right rounded expertise to be able to take some learnings from these particular daily incidents. I suppose for a reassurance piece is whenever we have any significant incidents, obviously we do investigate them, try and establish root causes, we put in action plans. And when we do have claims, we most certainly then reopen some form of investigation just to make sure that the original investigation is more than sufficient, and then it's in case we miss any other learnings from it. So we do have that process, but certainly we're working a lot with training and procedures and improving our current management system to make sure that we're able to, in future, be able to have that level of claims defensibility.
So would colleagues perhaps like Stacey to come back when her workload permits, just to kind of articulate that process of the team, the changes that have been made there?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Okay. And I'll leave that, Stacey, with Amanda and the team when we fit
So
the
the
agenda.
focus, I'm guessing, is lessons identified
Yes.
and processes that change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so again, I think this report is for noting. Are we happy to note? Yes, we're happy to note. Okay, now we move on to...
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you, yes. Yes, we're going to get another polish now.
That's it,
Is it? We get some sponsorship from Mr. Sheen or something.
Other polishes are available.
Fire rescue service recommend. Make way to keep an eye. Revenue up. So, fire service code of ethics. I think this must you, Simon.
That's myself again, Chair.
Simon, let's get a pattern here.
Members, so there on screen this paper is for noting, but it's to bring to your attention a recent publication, national publication, in respect to a fire and rescue service code of ethics. So just to introduce the background, Tom Windsor recommended that their nationally fire and rescue service, in line to professionalising more the service and applying some standards, is to develop a code of ethics or a code of conduct specifically for the fire sector. Now it was recognised that from there's an audit principles for staff in public office and also colleagues within the police force also have a code of ethics. So in the early part of this year, a working group was put together from representatives from around the sector to consider what might be a suite of principles, code of ethics, behavioural standards that we would expect from all employees of the Fire and Rescue Service. And in front of you is the outcome of that working group where they developed 5 ethical principles, particularly looking at how we deliver the services, how we behave as officers and employees and representatives of the Fire and Rescue Service. One thing that the working group wanted to ensure is that that it also complemented individual Fire and Rescue Service values that the service may introduce as an individual service. And of course we relate that to our own service. We have our own service values, we have our 6 values, and we also have our behavioural framework. In introducing the Code of Ethics, they were agreed by the Local Government Association and also the Police and Crime, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, as well as the National Fire Chiefs Council, and that was launched and went live in the middle of May. So in front of you, you have the Core Code of Ethics document, and alongside that, the working group also produced a guidance document to support Fire and Rescue Services in introducing and embedding the Core Code of Ethics into the individual services alongside their own service values. So where we are as a service in introducing these, we have started to cross-map how they support and correlate against our own service values and our own behavioural framework. I'm pleased to say that they do marry quite nicely together. We are currently reviewing our own service leadership charter that we developed as a senior service leadership team in how we behave and interact with each other, and we're also then start to cross-map that against any policies, procedures, as Karen mentioned earlier on, in particular around discipline, grievance, etc. So members, it is to bring to your attention and highlight the fact that we now have a national core code of ethics and that we are working to embed those and introduce those across the organisation. So I'll pause there, colleagues and members, for any questions.
Okay. Question, Richard.
Just a quick comment really in terms of rather than it just being the 2 main blue light authorities, police and fire, I noticed the LGA also signed up to it, and it's that sort of consistent sort of input, I suppose, as it embraces public life, and obviously you've got councillors on fire authorities, etc. I suppose it kind of needs to.
Yeah, obviously the Local Government Association is the employer. Are interested in influencing and signing off and ensuring they are comfortable with the Code of Ethics, similar to the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, and the National Fire Chiefs Council as advisors to central government and the employers as well.
So in terms of this, and I like it as a document because it's got those example things. It's not just numerous pages of text. I mean, you can actually relate to your own experience, can't you? I do note on page 12, which is our page 38, the commitment to our core code is a commitment from fire and rescue authorities and services, and also as individual members of fire and rescue services. So I guess that we need to, in some time soon, make sure that everybody signs up to that code, because I think it's key that we all do adhere to this. I mean, these are reasonably well-known principles, which I'm sure we're all following anyway, but I think we have to formalise process of adoption. And I'll speak to my colleagues to the left.
Yes, we can give this more thought because obviously elected members have their own codes
Yes.
set up, so that's separate, and we also have codes of ethics in the constitution
Yes.
for the officers as well. So I think this document is directed more at the staff
Yeah.
in the headquarters. So I'm not sure that, I mean, I'll take guidance from the officers here, but I don't know that the fire authority itself needs to commit to that. I think it's the senior leadership and the staff who commit.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I sat on the working groups that developed this back in January and up to its conception. The vision and I guess the terms of reference were focusing on employees of the Fire and Rescue Service. I have to say. And as I say, there's LGA as the employers, and National Fire Chief Councils as the voice, professional voice of the National Fire and Rescue Service, the sector, and also in some circumstances Police and Crime Commissioners officers and employees as well. And so we're generally focused, recognising that for elected members we have the known principles. Police have theirs for their staff. There was a gap that the Fire and Rescue Service staff and employees didn't have anything that set out a professional standard in terms of behaviours. So we're very much aimed at that level.
I suppose one option would be, rather than to bring us back, is in the recommendations we've got to note the launch and introduction of, we could also make a recommendation to commit to it.
Well, okay, yeah, we could do two things with me, if I may. One is that I think that it's incumbent upon us now to, wherever needed, we weave it into the constitution of the service, that it is for, it's an officer's commitment. What we do have is our leadership charter. And our leadership charter is a document that we signed, symbolically we signed. That's our commitment to us about how we're going to lead the service. We're in the process of reviewing and refreshing that at the moment, and within that will be the Code of Ethics. So we will weave in that Code of Ethics, and then we will re-sign it. So that's our commitment, that's what we will do. So yes, I think it would be useful to change the recommendation within the paper to say to commit to, and we will commit to.
So are we happy then to, and I'll be the proposer and seconder for this, so on recommendation on page 25, we're asked to note the launch and introduction of the National Court of Ethics and to
note the senior leadership commitment.
Okay, and to note senior leadership commitment to the Code of Ethics. That embraces service and
Are you happy with that, Nick?
Yeah, politicians. Okay, so can I have a proposer for that? Brenda, seconder, Ruth?
I'll second.
Thank you. So with that amendment, are we happy to accept the recommendations? Is it right to have a proposer second for this as well?
Might be as wise, yes.
Okay, so Shelley and Brenda. Okay, so all in favour? Lovely, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a good piece of work. So thank you, Simon, for your creation of it.
You're welcome, Chair.
Now,
it's a pleasure to be involved in it.
I was supposed to ask anyone in the interest to have left the room, but I hope nobody left the room for that, so the Code of Ethics isn't dreadful. That's great. So number 11 is the recruitment and selection process for the Assistant Chief Fire Officer. Now, I've got to say, for those who are interested, need to leave the room. Now, I presume that means anybody thinks they might apply for the job.
Yes, there is no one that I
So I need to formally say, does anybody think it's applied for the Assistant Chief Fire Officer job, you now need to leave the room? I'm not going to. Okay, so I think we're clear then. So, is this you again, Simon, by any chance?
No, that was the Chief Fire Officer.
It's the reason why I'm here, Chairman.
All right. I thought you could see Simon collapse with his workload.
This is Simon's committee as a lead director, but I'm here
All right.
as a chief officer because this is a senior officer appointment.
No, I just need to Stacey, reducing risk. Right.
Thank you, Chair. Members, before you is a paper recommending and requesting authorisation to appoint a new Assistant Chief Fire Officer. So members will be aware that Assistant Chief Fire Officer Rob Davis retired on the 15th of May after 30 years service. And so we congratulate Rob on his 30 years service and we wish him well for the future on his retirement. But of course that leaves a vacancy for us, and it's a substantive vacancy and a permanent vacancy of an Assistant Chief Fire Officer's post. We do need 3 uniformed officers in service in order for us to provide a 24-hour rota between us, so myself, Simon and the other Assistant Chief Fire Officer. We have a temporary assistant in place at the moment, which is Steve Imrie, who's been doing that on a temporary basis for a few months now, and will remain in place until a substantive appointment is made. Within the Constitution and within the terms of reference of the People and Culture Committee, it is your responsibility to commission me to go out to advert, and then of course it's an appointment by this committee on behalf of the authority. And what we've prepared for you today is what that process will look like in terms of going out to advert, what the advert looks like, what the job description looks like, and the accompanying process. And that's laid out within the paper. It is right and proper, and it's incumbent upon us to go far and wide and to seek applicants from across the UK. So this will be advertised on the National Fire Chiefs Council jobs webpage for vacancies and for jobs. And we will follow the process as in the paper here. So it's really today seeking approval from yourselves in terms of signing off the job description and the advert, but also seeking approval from yourself in terms of what the selection process looks like. It's quite a detailed selection process which involves a number of forums, an application, a number of forums, culminating in a presentation to the committee and a formal interview by the committee, which is slightly different than what's been proposed previously, and it actually will hopefully provide us with a much more, if you like, rounded candidate in terms of having a number of things to present to members prior to that appointment. We have put within the appendices a proposed or anticipated timeline that will be subject to change, of course, depending on the number of applicants and where we go. And that time frame will need to be flexible. But you'll see that there'll be an initial sift, shortlisting by the committee. There'll also be some other works that will be done around psychometric tests and doing some of these forms which the service will do on your behalf and report back to you prior to the final day, which will be those that will be selected will be do a presentation to members based on the subject for your choice, and also a formal interview by the committee. So that's it, members, really, in the round. So just want your approval and recommendations that are within the paper.
The process itself, which has just been alluded to, is on page 79 of your papers. It's Appendix 4.
Okay, well, I'm very keen to move this forward. I think we've got Steve in, we're doing a very good job as an interim, but we do need to make sure that we get our management structure at the very top, secure as quickly as we possibly can. I'm very keen that we make sure that there are as many opportunities for internal candidates as well as external, so we get the full range of offers. So I think we'll be doing that in terms of making sure that we encourage our talent spotting processes. Are colleagues happy? I'm not seeing any hands up to speak for us to move to the recommendations to approve. Yeah. So we've got 3 recommendations. Can I have a proposal, please? For Brenda, second is Shelley. Thank you. All in favour? Okay, that's passed. Thank you. So we'll await with interest the response. I mean, what is your feeling at the moment in terms of other recruitment elsewhere in the country? Is there a reasonable pool being considered?
I think it depends on the job, Chair, but limited numbers, really. There are a number of reasons for that.
Yeah.
Which we've discussed previously.
Yeah.
Limited pools. I am aware that certain chief officer positions up and down the UK have got 1 or 2 applicants.
Yeah.
But we will go out national and we'll see what comes back in terms of applications. This is a rigorous and robust process. Yeah. But it should be. For the level of the role, it should be a rigorous and robust process. And we'll see what we get to.
So the next meeting is item 12 then, which is on the 17th of September at 10:30. Location to be decided, I think, dependent on the underlying government regulations at the time. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else, maybe outside.
You never know.
Maybe back virtual again. Now we want to item 13, and I've got to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business on the grounds that they contain exempt information pursuant to Schedule 12A, Part 1, Paragraph 1 and 3, the Local Government Act 1972, and in accordance with the Schedule 12A, Part 2, Paragraph 10 of the Local Government Act 1972, The public interest in maintaining exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Do I see a proposer? Richard, thank you. Do I see a seconder? Shelley, thank you.
I'll just
All in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Now, you need to stop recording.